Look at this photograph. Not the uniform. Not the ceremony. Not the carefully constructed public moment designed to communicate stability and project institutional health. Just a boy. A teenager, caught in an unguarded moment, walking somewhere, barely aware of the camera. The most ordinary, extraordinary image in the world. Because that boy, that unremarkable, unhurried, simply existing boy, will be King of England. Not of the empire his great-great-great-grandparents ruled with iron and arrogance. Not of the Commonwealth his great-grandmother held together through sheer force of presence and 7 decades of iron discipline. King of a Britain that is smaller, louder, more sceptical, more diverse, more connected to the rest of the world, and more uncertain about its own identity than at any point in its modern history. King of a country that spent the first quarter of the 21st century watching the royal family publicly detonate itself in courtrooms and television studios and Netflix documentaries and legal filings submitted to international human rights tribunals and legal filings submitted to international human rights tribunals. King of a people who will have read, by the time George sits in the coronation chair, everything that has ever been written about the institution he is inheriting. Every sealed document that time has pried open. Every crisis that journalists and biographers and historians documented, because the palace preferred managed silence, but the world preferred the truth. George will be a king who cannot hide. And the question that this entire series, 20 episodes, 20 investigations, 20 forensic examinations of the most scrutinised institution on the planet has been building toward, the question underneath every power move we have mapped and every sealed secret we have traced to its source, is this. Is the monarchy he inherits worth saving? And if it is, what does saving it actually require? Tonight, we answer both questions. Completely. Honestly. For the first time. And before we go any further, if you have watched this series from the beginning, if you have followed every thread of this investigation with us, then you already know that this channel does not deal in palace-approved narratives or carefully managed press releases. We deal in the unfiltered truth. So if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Press the like button on this video because what you are about to hear is the definitive forensic assessment of where the British monarchy is going and whether the people inside it are equal to the challenge of taking it there. Now, let us begin. Before we look forward, we need to hold one final time the full weight of everything this series has documented. A king fighting cancer while his son quietly assumes authority in the corridors of power, managing a shadow reign that the public can sense but the palace will never formally acknowledge. A princess whose recovery from her own cancer diagnosis was handled with such extraordinary communications precision that the management of appearances became as significant a story as the illness itself. A duke in permanent exile whose legal campaigns have opened constitutional questions that the British establishment cannot cleanly close and dare not fully answer. A disgraced prince sitting in a 30-room mansion on Crown property, refusing every instruction to vacate, maintaining back-channel communications with foreign governments, negotiating with an institution that desperately wants him gone, but cannot remove him without paying a price, reputational, legal, financial, that it is calculated as too high. A queen consort whose entire public identity was constructed around a singular destination, a title that was the finish line of a 26-year race, who is now discovering that the finish line was never a destination, but simply a position in a race that continues indefinitely, without the runner who handed her the bib. Sealed wills. Hidden immigration files. Manipulated photographs released to the public by a palace communications team that apparently believed nobody would notice. Phone hacking operations that reached into the private conversations of future kings and their closest confidants over a period of years. Constitutional gaps that the Regency Act was never designed to fill, gaps that a king's illness exposed with uncomfortable precision, and that the institution chose to manage through appearances rather than resolve through honest legislative reform. A succession crisis unfolding in slow motion, managed by the illusion of continuity rather than addressed by genuine constitutional governance. A lifestyle brand launched by a Duke and Duchess of Sussex that has not found its audience. A podcast cancelled by a streaming executive in the most brutal possible brevity. A Netflix documentary that performed brilliantly by telling the story of a family at war, and a follow-up lifestyle series that underperformed by pretending the war had somehow ended when everyone watching knew it had not. Two brothers. One institution. A fracture so fundamental that a father's cancer diagnosis and a daughter-in-law's cancer diagnosis, and the genuine, unscripted human repair that shared suffering produced between a king and his heir, could soften the edges of the break, but could not bridge the gap. This is the inheritance. Not the crown jewels. Not the palaces. Not the constitutional framework or the sovereign grant or the Duchy of Cornwall or the extraordinary accumulated prestige of 1,000 years of institutional continuity. This, everything listed above, is the actual inheritance. The beautiful and the broken. The grand and the shameful. The staged and the genuine. The sealed and the transparent. And the question that William must answer, and that George will eventually answer after him, is not whether to accept it. That choice does not exist. You do not choose to be born in Windsor. You do not choose the specific moment of history into which your life falls. The question is what you do with it, what all of it demands of you, and whether you are honest enough and brave enough to meet that demand. History does not announce its turning points in real time. They are only visible in retrospect, when decisions that appeared to be routine management choices are revealed, by their consequences, to have been something far more fundamental. But some turning points are visible even as they happen, if you are paying the right kind of attention, the forensic kind, the kind that this channel has been paying throughout this entire investigation. 2024 and 2025 have produced several that future historians of the British monarchy will identify as the moments when the institution's trajectory was definitively set. The first is the decision to continue. Charles's decision, in the face of cancer, in the face of genuinely reduced capacity, in the face of the constitutional vacuum his illness created, to maintain the formal architecture of his reign, rather than trigger the regency mechanisms that existed precisely for this purpose. It was a decision that prioritised the appearance of continuity over the honesty of constitutional transparency. William's parallel decision to support that continuity, rather than accelerate around it, is either a profound act of institutional loyalty or a missed opportunity for the kind of honest governance that the monarchy desperately needs. Possibly, examined with full rigour, it is both simultaneously, and that ambiguity tells you everything about the complexity of the institution William is being prepared to lead. The second turning point is the decision to reconcile. The repair of the Charles-William relationship through the shared experience of illness, private, personal, entirely unplanned by any palace communication strategy, is the kind of turning point that institutions cannot manufacture. It happened because two human beings found their way back to each other through suffering. That it simultaneously consolidated the exclusion of Harry is not the intention of that reconciliation. It is its consequence. And consequences, in the history of the British monarchy, frequently matter more than intentions. The monarchy that emerges from that repair is more unified, more purposeful, more operationally coherent than the monarchy that preceded it. It is also, as a direct function of that unity, more clearly and more deliberately defined about who belongs and who does not. That definition has costs. They will become visible in time. The third turning point, and this is the one that forensic analysis reveals most clearly, is the decision not to reform. The deliberate, institutionally motivated absence of any public, parliamentary, or transparent conversation about the Regency Act, about royal financial secrecy, about the constitutional framework for managing sovereign incapacity, about the legal basis for security provision decisions, about the content of sealed royal wills. The absence of that conversation is not an oversight. It is a choice, an active, strategic, institutionally self-protective choice to manage the existing framework rather than strengthen it. And here is what that choice costs, even when it works. Each time the British monarchy chooses management over reform, each time it seals a document that could be opened, manages a crisis that could be honestly acknowledged, maintains an appearance that could be abandoned in favour of truth, it spends a unit of the public trust that is its most finite and most essential resource. And in 2024 and 2025, the monarchy is spending that trust at a rate that its current approval ratings do not yet fully reflect. The bill will come. The form it takes, the year it arrives, the specific event that triggers it, cannot be predicted with certainty. But the arithmetic of institutional trust is not complicated. You cannot spend indefinitely without replenishing. And the only genuine replenishment is honesty. Now let us talk about William. One final time. With the full honesty that this channel has always owed its audience and will not abandon at the moment it matters most. William Arthur Philip Lewis, Prince of Wales, the future King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. A man who has spent his entire conscious life being prepared for a role that cannot be fully prepared for, no matter how sophisticated the preparation. Who has lost more than most people who observe his life from the outside can fully comprehend. His mother, at 12 years old, was taken in the most traumatic and public manner imaginable, in a Paris tunnel, in the middle of the night, while the cameras of the world were already waiting. His family's unity across his entire adult life fracturing in full public view. The simple, unremarkable privacy of a human life lived outside the weight of constitutional destiny, that most basic freedom, the freedom to simply exist without the institution's claim on your existence, taken from him before he was old enough to understand what was being taken. And he has responded to that accumulation of loss, not with his mother's extraordinary, almost dangerous expressiveness, and not with his father's intellectual complexity and the sense of permanent philosophical restlessness that made Charles simultaneously fascinating and exhausting as a public figure. William has responded with something harder and quieter and more difficult to read from the outside. Discipline. Deliberate, daily, unglamorous institutional purpose. The choice was made not once, but continuously, in every professional decision and every public appearance and every private meeting with palace advisors, to be what the institution needs, rather than what he, personally, in some parallel life, might have been. People who observe these things with professional seriousness, constitutional experts, biographers, royal correspondents who have watched multiple generations of this family perform their function, assess William as the most institutionally capable heir the British monarchy has produced in several generations. That assessment is a genuine compliment. It is also, when examined closely, a precisely calibrated one. Institutionally capable. disciplined, purposeful, aligned with the requirements of the role in a way that makes him, on paper, the ideal candidate to take the crown through its most complex contemporary challenge. But here is the forensic assessment that institutional capability alone cannot reach. The monarchy that William is inheriting does not need a better manager. It has had extraordinary managers. Elizabeth II was the greatest institutional manager in the monarchy's entire modern history, a woman who maintained personal approval ratings of extraordinary consistency across 7 decades by the disciplined, relentless, never-wavering performance of institutional duty. Charles, for all the personal complexity that has defined his public life and provided the raw material for more biographies and documentaries and forensic investigations than any other member of the modern royal family, has been in his own right a serious and substantive institutional thinker who spent the decades of his extended waiting to reign developing a genuine vision for what the crown needed to become. What the monarchy William is inheriting needs is not a better manager. It is not even a more compelling vision. It needs trust. Not the conditional, performance-dependent, poll-driven approval that current surveys measure. Not the sentiment that rises when a royal baby is born and falls when a royal scandal breaks. Real, deep, structural, unconscious public trust is the kind that an institution receives when the public believes, genuinely and without requiring convincing, that the institution is honest about what it is and what it actually does. Elizabeth had that trust. It was built across 70 years of daily, visible, unglamorous duty, and it was, at its peak, the single most valuable asset the British monarchy possessed in its entire modern history. And it evaporated with a speed that shocked the institution's own internal analysts because the trust was in her personally. In her individual authority and her individual presence and her individual decision, renewed daily for 7 decades, to be exactly what the institution required. It was not trust in the institution itself. The institution, as this series has documented across 20 detailed forensic investigations, had not earned that deeper, more durable, self-sustaining form of trust in its own right. William can build it. The tools are available. The public goodwill is real, measurable, currently present in the polling data in ways that should not be dismissed. The appetite for a monarchy that is genuinely worthy of democratic support, that does not merely occupy its constitutional position through inertia and managed sentiment, but actively earns the loyalty it receives, that appetite is significant and sincere in the British public. But building genuine institutional trust requires something the palace has not yet chosen to do. It requires honesty about the gap. The gap between the institution, as it presents itself in its carefully managed public communications, and the institution as it actually operates in the rooms that no camera ever enters. Not confessional honesty. Not the memoir-driven, tell everything, burn the institution transparency that Harry chose in his particular exile, a strategy that, whatever its emotional authenticity, damaged his own credibility as thoroughly as it damaged the institution he was attempting to expose. Structural honesty, the kind that manifests not in interviews but in legislation. In opened documents rather than vaults sealed for 90 years. In Regency Act reform that reflects 21st century medical reality rather than 1937 constitutional assumptions. In security arrangements that apply equally under law rather than institutionally selectively. In succession frameworks that can be read and understood by the children will govern rather than be sealed until those children have reached old age. These are not radical demands. They are not Republican demands. They are the demands of a public that currently, actively, genuinely supports the monarchy, but that reserves the democratic right to withdraw that support if the institution continues to prioritize its own institutional protection over the accountability it owes to the people who fund and constitutionally protect it. William has the opportunity. Whether he has any individual raised entirely inside this specific institutional culture, shaped entirely by its assumptions and its priorities, and its deeply embedded preference for management over transparency, whether such an individual can develop the structural courage to take that opportunity. That is the question this series cannot answer for you, because it has not happened yet. It will not happen or fail to happen in a press release or a television interview or a perfectly staged balcony appearance at Buckingham Palace on a sunny afternoon. It will happen in the decisions. The quiet, unannounced, institutionally invisible decisions that an organisation makes when it believes the world is not watching closely enough to notice. We are watching. The people who watch this channel are watching. And history, that most patient and most unforgiving of observers, is watching most closely of all. This is where we end. Not with a final revelation. Not with a last sealed document forced open by the pressure of public scrutiny, or a climactic confrontation between estranged brothers that resolves a decade of fracture in a single dramatic scene. The British monarchy does not operate in scenes. It continues, quietly and inexorably, through the deaths and the accessions and the coronations and the state openings and the trooping the colours and the Christmas walkabouts and the sealed documents and the constitutional adjustments and the very slow, very patient, very institutional process of becoming whatever the next era demands. It has been performing this adaptation for 1,000 years. It will continue performing it long after every person currently inside its walls, Charles fighting cancer and running his reign on reduced capacity, William managing the shadow authority that falls to an heir when a sovereign is diminished, Catherine recovering with the private courage that the public has only partially been permitted to witness, Harry litigating from California, Andrew refusing from his 30 rooms, Camilla managing her role with the survivor's instinct of someone who has outlasted every crisis that was supposed to end her, Anne embodying what genuine lifelong duty looks like when it is not performed for cameras but simply lived, after all of them are gone. The institution outlasts the individuals. That is the source of its extraordinary resilience. It is also the source of its most profound and least examined moral complexity, because institutions that outlast individuals can bury their failures in longevity, conceal the documents for 90 years, because by the time the archives open, the people who bear accountability for what is inside them are no longer available to be held accountable, can manage the public perception of any given crisis for long enough that the managed version eventually displaces the historical record. Or, and this is the choice that this forensic analysis has been building toward across every episode of this series, or they can use that longevity differently, can use the time not to bury, but to build, to construct, slowly and incrementally, and in the unglamorous daily decisions that nobody announces and no press office ever issues a statement about, something that is genuinely worthy of the extraordinary constitutional position it occupies. Worthy of a country that has chosen, through its democratic processes, through its cultural attachment, through the genuine and sophisticated affection that millions of British people feel for an institution they simultaneously criticise with considerable intelligence and sometimes devastating wit, to maintain a hereditary monarchy at the centre of its constitutional identity in the 21st century. That choice, examined with clear eyes, is a genuinely extraordinary one. A modern democratic country with universal suffrage and a free press and a tradition of radical political thought stretching back centuries has chosen repeatedly, through every mechanism of democratic expression available to it, to keep a hereditary sovereign. To make that sovereign the formal head of state, the embodiment of national continuity, the living symbol around which the country's constitutional identity coheres. That choice contains within it an implicit compact that the palace understands perfectly well, even when it prefers not to articulate it directly. The public gives the monarchy its constitutional position, its extraordinary financial resources, its legal protections, its cultural oxygen, the centuries of accumulated prestige that make it the most globally recognized institution of its kind in the world. And the monarchy, in return for that gift, which is renewed by democratic consent in each generation, owes the public something. Not entertainment. Not the extended family soap opera of internal warfare that the last decade has provided in extraordinary and sometimes excruciating abundance. Not carefully managed spectacle and staged moments of calculated emotional connection. Something harder and more essential and more difficult for an institution built on the management of appearances to genuinely provide. The truth about itself. Its actual financial arrangements, rather than the ones described in its public communications. Its actual constitutional limitations, rather than the impression of limitless authority. Its actual internal conflicts, rather than the unity projected from the balcony. Its actual failures, rather than the management of those failures into the historical record as difficult moments that the institution navigated with dignity. Not all of this, all at once. Not in ways that would destabilize the institution at the precise historical moment when its stability is most necessary. But gradually, through reform, through the slow and genuine alignment of what the institution says it is with what it actually is, the truth. That is the compact. That is what a monarchy in a democracy owes to the people who choose, generation after generation, to keep it. And so we come to the question, the one that this entire series, 20 forensic investigations, hundreds of thousands of words spent following every thread of power and secrecy and human drama inside the most scrutinized institution in the world, the question it has all been building toward. It is not about Charles. It is not about William or Harry or Andrew or Camilla or Catherine or Meghan. It is about that boy in the photograph. The one who did not choose this. Who was born into it with no more agency than any child has over the family they enter and the history they inherit. Who will spend his life as his father has spent his life, as his grandfather has spent his life, as his great-grandmother spent every year of her extraordinarily long and extraordinarily disciplined reign, carrying something that most people who observe it from the outside will never fully understand the weight of. The question is whether the institution that places that weight on his shoulders will, by the time George is old enough to feel the full gravity of it, have earned the right to ask him to carry it. Whether it will have done the work. Whether it will have chosen honesty over the management of appearances. Reform over the protection of institutional control. Accountability over the sealed vault. Whether the monarchy that George eventually inherits will be something that a thoughtful, fully informed, historically literate, democratically conscious public can look at with complete knowledge of everything documented in this series and everything that future investigations will add to the record and choose, genuinely, freely, without being managed into it, choose to support. Not because they have been convinced into it by a sophisticated public relations operation, or because constitutional inertia makes the alternative feel impossible, but because the institution has, through the slow accumulation of honest decisions made in rooms that no camera enters, earned it. That is the only future worth building. That is the only monarchy worth having. and whether the people currently building it in those rooms, making those decisions, choosing daily between management and honesty, whether they understand that, whether they are equal to it. That is the question that history is asking right now, in real time, about a living institution, about a family of human beings carrying the weight of 1,000 years, about a boy in a photograph who is simply, for this one unguarded moment, existing. The only question, the biggest question, the one that belongs not to the palace, but to you. Do you believe the British monarchy deserves to survive the 21st century? Not as a constitutional convenience. Not as a global tourist attraction generating billions in economic activity. Not as a managed symbol of national identity maintained by the careful suppression of inconvenient truth, but as a genuinely meaningful, democratically accountable, honestly governed institution that actually earns, through the daily courage of honest decisions, the loyalty of every generation that chooses to give it. And if you believe it deserves that future, do you believe the people currently building it are going to deliver it? Write your most honest answer in the comments. Not the polite one. The real one. Because this is the comments section that matters. This series is complete. 20 topics. 20 forensic investigations. One institution, examined from every angle we could reach. Thank you for watching every single one of them. Subscribe, because the story does not end here. It never ends. That is the point. That is the monarchy.